right.
So now when you look at the Midwest, which is now called the Rust Belt, you have all these African Americans who migrated to
Right.
become this proletarian in these urban spaces, but now
There's no way to work.
nowhere to work. And the only thing they're doing now in order to have a space for them is building prisons. So
Okay.
there's a correlation between deindustrialization, mass incarceration, and the displacement of a whole segment of the society. Mexicans do the jobs that other
Americans
people
don't want to.
But
Yeah.
that's false.
Of course it's false.
Because every job that's been done in America, black people have always wanted to do these jobs. The thing was, I just want to be compensated for my
Right.
labor.
Yeah, they don't want to be worked like slaves.
Exactly.
We've already had that.
We've already
We've already been there, done that. We don't want to revisit it.
been there, done that.
Where do we go from here?
I mean, when I think of protests, sort of people who are downtrodden trying to use their sort of, let's say, civil disobedience for their own rights, I think a lot of like union workers and striking. But there is, of course, a historical racial context to union membership in the first place, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we see the disappearance of the whole black artisan class. When we look at the turn of the 20th century, when they're talking about all of these Italians and Western Europeans coming over to help build these cities,
Right.
we forget that you have the black artisans who were
already here in the first
already
place.
in the South.
Yeah.
Blacksmiths, carpenters.
They were already the ones that were constructing all those plantations in the first place since the beginning, right?
Off of whose blueprint?
Right.
Their own blueprint.
Their own.
The front porch is a African invention.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me that.
Yeah, it's an African invention.
Wow, it's amazing.
So when we look at these things that basically in the North, they were utilizing laws to keep the African artisans in the South. And in response, you have
So they basically didn't have a free market competition. They
You wouldn't have a free market competition.
Right.
The people in the South, especially the elites and the capitalists in the South, they wanted to maintain the indispensable source of undervalued labor.
right.
But also what they did, which was sad, is they did not allow these individuals to practice their craft so they could pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is
So the skills were lost.
the skills were lost. So
Wow.
because they made these individuals sharecroppers instead of allowing them to become blacksmiths. You know, so
Iron workers, everything.
all of that.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most damaging histories of this whole idea of union liberalization, is the way that they excluded African Americans from being a part of labor unions until we get up to probably like
The 70s or something?
like
Yeah.
within the 70s.
Yeah.
I know in Wisconsin, especially Milwaukee and
Yeah.
Racine, there was a strong
You are from
black.
Wisconsin.
Yes.
You are the only black man
Yes.
from Wisconsin.
Well, there's a lot of
That's
us.
right.
We got to keep
Yeah,
in mind,
man.
Wisconsin leads the nation with locking up black males.
Oh, yeah, we could
So
talk
it
about
may not be a lot of us there, but we're there enough in order for white supremacy to
Sorry I
want to
brought
keep
it
us
up.
under lock and
Sorry I
key.
brought it up,
Yeah.
Anton.
which keeps in mind something that happened at home. A young black man was killed by the police.
Oh, wow.
I guess they shot 43 times. They hit the young black man 17.
Wow.
We're still waiting for the police report and the autopsy so we can.
They have like a body camera?
No body cameras.
Okay.
The sheriff department has body cameras, but the Racine Police Department does not.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
may that young brother rest in peace.
Absolutely.
Dante Shannon. Your family, you're in our prayers.
Mm-hmm.
And stay positive, stay encouraged, and stay focused, because it's going to be a fight.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the things in Wisconsin that we do know that African Americans were allowed to join unions.
Okay.
Detroit, you had African Americans in unions in these automotive plants.
Okay.
But with deindustrializations and rifts, last hired, first fired, African Americans, they were the first ones who lost their jobs in these places.
Right.
So now when you look at the Midwest, which is now called the Rust Belt, you have all these African Americans who migrated to
Right.
become this proletarian in these urban spaces, but now
There's no way to work.
nowhere to work. And the only thing they're doing now in order to have a space for them is building prisons. So
Okay.
there's a correlation between deindustrialization, the mass incarceration, and the displacement of a whole segment of the society.
Okay.
It's
About the union striking.
the union striping. The union
Sorry to
striping.
change the subject, but
It's,
we're talking about protest and peril in the historical context of the United States.
well, one of the things that we got to understand when we look at the progressive era, in which these unions were formed to have healthier working conditions, to create the 5-day working week, to make sure
And
that
child labor, right?
child labor,
Right.
to make sure that these individuals are working to efficiency in the sanitary environment. Also in Wisconsin, that I hate to toot the horn, that a
That's
lot of
okay.
these projects that we end up having for the FDR's New Deal project, they're all coming out of Wisconsin because Wisconsin is a hotbed of labor union rights, and Milwaukee has a history of a socialist mayor, and you had Fighting Bob, good old Fighting Bob, who was from Wisconsin, that was a progressive.
Okay.
So you have this whole notion of creating these programs for the betterment of the worker.
Okay.
Unfortunately, when we look at how NAFTA, as well as other jobs and other factories moving overseas and outside of the country, today the labor unions are seen as the problem in which, the labor unions are seen as the reason why these jobs left. So
Because they're demanding more pay, for example, and they're made scapegoats of why jobs are being lost, or is it that the jobs are moving overseas because of the price of labor?
I believe it's a little of both because, with the labor, one of the things that we have been successful as a country with making sure that the worker is taken care of.
Right.
That basically if something happens, if he's hurt on the job, if he's duly represented in response to the interests of his boss who just wants his output.
Okay.
That you're just not going to exploit this individual and take from him, that basically you're going to be there to support him in good and in ill health.
Right.
Overseas, they don't have that.
Right. They just
And that's
work
one of the
until
things.
they die.
Exactly. That's one of the things I try to tell a lot of black males. They would say, I'm not working for $7 an hour. But I'm like, brother, there is no minimum wage in Africa.
right.
They probably get like $4 a month.
Yeah. Or south of the border, and that's the
Or
reason
south of the
why.
border.
Yeah.
Yeah, south of the border. Especially when we look at the history of how migrant labor work in America. Because before you had, in Texas, there was a group of Mexicans called the brucheros. These were the individuals who would come in seasonal and work.
Right.
And one of the things that the Democratic Party and other groups has used as a talking point is that Mexicans do the jobs that other
Americans
people
don't want to.
But
Yeah.
that's false.
Of course it's false.
Because every job that's been done in America, black people have always wanted to do these jobs. The thing was, I just want to be compensated for my
Right.
labor.
Yeah. They don't want to be worked like slaves.
Exactly.
'Cause we've already had that.
We've already
We've already been there, done that. We don't want to revisit it.
been there, done that.
And why would you expect anything different?
So why
in a
would you
place
want
like
me
America?
to
Yeah.
do this? Why would you expect for me to be
Yeah.
grateful to
Yeah.
do the job that
It's
my
horrible.
great-great-grandfather's been
Yeah,
doing?
they basically just want more people to exploit. And
Yeah.
that's the sickest, saddest thing.
So the sad thing about it, when the migrant Mexican worker did come, while the African American was saying, "Look, we're striking until you pay us what we're asking for," the migrant Mexican worker said, "Well, we'll do it for
Right.
the $5 an hour."
Right, and that happened too, obviously, in St. Louis, where they had the St. Louis riots. People, they looted and stuff.
Right.
But blacks were brought in, oftentimes were brought in to replace the workers that were striking, right? And then, of course, there was that built-up animosity between the people who were strike breakers and the people who were
Well, they're called
the
scabs.
Scabs.
Scabs. Yeah, I have friends who are scabs, actually.
Wow.
And
To this day?
To this day.
Wow.
To this day, whenever unions are attempting to renegotiate their contracts with the owner of the factory,
Right.
they strike. And my friend, he waits by the phone.
Wow.
And individual call him and say, hey, I have something for you. Flying to St. Louis. It may be 3 or 4 days, or it may be a month.
Wow. He flies around the country and does that?
He flies around the country and does
Wow.
it. And they're quite lucrative. Some of these individuals, they end up staying in these cities and working and getting hired on to the job because when they go there, they work their butts off.
Yeah,
And
they've
this
already
is
developed a skill and know how to work
Exactly.
in that particular environment.
exactly because that's one of the things that has somewhat hindered, adequate African American working class is that we're not being allowed to
Develop our skills.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if we can't develop our skills,
Yeah.
how can we work?
Well, I think even as of early or late as this summer, I remember I was at a political event up in Frederick, and I was talking to an electrician or a plumber or something like that. Someone who has like some household contracting business. And, his thing is like, well, there are no Americans that are available to do the work that I demand. I was like, I call you on your BS because
Right.
that's not true at all. And there's this idea that the American worker is useless. And I'm like, how do we get to that point in society? I think it's a devastating thing, especially in an area that you think that, all you need is to develop a skill.
Right.
And we don't have that ability to practice. We have apprenticeships. We have, workforce development programs. You develop your workforce, but then there are no jobs for those people to
Exactly.
stay and maintain and grow their skills.
Well, one of the things that earned my discontent for the Democratic Party is basically.
Please tell me. Please tell me.
Well, it's basically with the unions. Basically with the
Yeah,
unions
yeah.
and how unions traditionally
Yeah.
excluded African Americans.
Right.
But then also, the unions are able to control a lot of the vocational skills.
Right.
So since they're no longer in the high schools, like they were probably for my uncle's generations, and
Vocational,
then
VOTEC.
they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, because they were looked down upon. They were like, oh, why would anybody want to have, sweat on their brow to get a good, honest, decent living? I mean, especially in our region, people look down upon people who use their hands for a craft, and it's in a trade. It's ridiculous.
Well, not in the Midwest. In the Midwest, in the Midwest, a lot of those guys, they would have loved
Right.
to have a job where they can go in, use their hands, or
No, don't get me wrong. People want to do that.
Right.
I'm just saying the policymakers, et cetera, are the ones that are, changing curriculum to push everyone to be,
Uniform,
college ready,
white-collared,
sit in a desk, and do
commercial
some random thing.
economy.
Yeah.
So it goes back to this whole notion of investing in a citizen.
Right.
Because at one point in time, Americans were all invested
Right.
in us moving towards a more perfect union,
Right.
us developing
Into full citizenship.
into
and
full
everything. Right.
citizenship,
We've talked about that.
this
Yeah.
pride in the American brand. It's the
Made in America. Remember those commercials?
Exactly.
Those were so great.
At one point in time, Made in America really actually meant something.
Yeah.
But now we have these global capitalists who's basically sold various portions of the country. So now when you start looking at the dynamics of how race comes up, especially in the black community, where individuals say, oh, global white supremacy, but then you start saying, well, who owns Time?
Right.
Who owns IBM?
Right.
Who owns, I forgot the name of the dock in New Orleans.
Okay.
Like, who owns these things? And you
Right.
start to see that the biggest investors in traditional American companies are non-black people from the Middle East.
Okay.
Are China.
Right.
China's the biggest investor in our
Our stock
debt.
exchange, yeah. Oh, and our
So-
debt. You're right. Right.
So when we're saying global white supremacy, these people are not white.
Yeah.
And when we say made in America or American pride, it doesn't mean American pride of 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
The global capitalists, they basically sold off portions of America, the culture and the people. And now when we look at what is America or what is American made,
Right.
it's not being made by us. So when we look at the automotive industry,
Yeah, we're stuck somewhere collecting the dole while other people are making our parts when other people are assembling them.
exactly, the automotive industry is one of the biggest things. If we want to say we want an American car, say I want to buy an American car, when I lift the hood, the parts are not made in America anymore.
Right.
But now you have Nissans being made in Dayton, Ohio.
They're assembled here,
They're assembled here.
but they're not, like all the different components, I guess the supply chain has been corrupted.
Exactly. So do I buy the car that's quote unquote supposed to be an American car, or do I buy the car that's assembled in America to help the Americans maintain their jobs, their lifestyle, and their habits, and send their kids to school?